Welcome back, folks. Keeping our eye on the top lead today, which Dow Jones down 2,000, still in the throes of a desperate market right here, looking for a bid, and it's not looking good. A lot of crazy things are happening in this very fluid news cycle where the president is invoking all these acts. We spoke about this morning how the president had invoked the Defense Production Act, and one guy knows a heck of a lot more about this than I do. That's Bob Barr. He's a former CIA analyst, former federal prosecutor, a Republican congressman from Georgia, and a great friend of the show. Mr. Barr, I know you wrote this op-ed recently where you make the point that people should be happy that the president is invoking certain powers for a health emergency, but you mentioned unquestioning manner they're invoking a whole heck of a lot of other stuff, and it scares you.
It worries me a great deal, John, not just what the president is doing under the so-called National Emergencies Act, which goes back to 1976, but also what governors and particularly city councils and mayors are doing with these emergency declarations. First of all, none of these statutes define really in any meaningful way what an emergency is. It simply is whatever the issuing authority decides that it is. Once an emergency is declared, then it opens up a whole range of powers that are available to either the mayor, if it's a city ordinance, or the governor, if it's at state level, or the president and the federal bureaucracy. And these have, many of these powers have nothing whatsoever to do with directly addressing, in this case, the health problem posed by the coronavirus. So, for example, I was just reading a few minutes ago, John, an ordinance that was passed in the city of Fresno, California, an emergency declaration that allows the city to stop any transfer or sale of a firearm or ammunition. Now, what in heaven's name does that have to do with a health problem is beyond me. But this is the danger lurking in all of these emergency declarations that very, very few people look at, and even fewer read, that infringe fundamentally guaranteed constitutional liberties.
So, Mr. Barr, you write in your op-ed also about the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which doesn't sound like it has a heck of a lot to do with the pandemic or an emergency. And you point out that while President Trump is taking fire for saying a Chinese virus, it has to be classified as a foreign threat for him to be able to enact the 77 Act, right?
It's very, yes, it's a very interesting question, John. The internet, what shorthand is called the IEPA, this International Emergency Powers Act, was passed in 1977, and it had to do primarily with Iran and Iranian assets in the United States in the late 70s. But in order for these particular powers under IEPA to be in effect, the threat that triggers them has to be a foreign threat. And then that allows these powers under this International Emergency Economic Powers Act enables the president to have extensive powers with regard to suspending banking transactions, seizing and freezing accounts, and so forth. So here again, there's a reason beyond any of this silly talk about whether or not calling it a Wuhan or a Chinese virus. Regardless of that, there's, I think, a particular reason why the president has been very careful and very explicit in saying that this coronavirus or COVID-19 virus is a foreign threat, because it then brings into the equation under the National Emergencies Act additional powers with regard to banking and freezing of assets.
So I'm hoping personally that I feel like this guy, Anthony Fauci, has been a real guiding voice in this. It seems like he's universally respected on both sides of the aisle and in the media. And I'm thinking maybe if we follow his advice, he said if everybody hunkers down for a couple of weeks, we could probably get past the peak area. Maybe we should all just be good citizens and the government could stop enacting all these acts and we could get past this.
That would be the rational approach, because what you're talking about, John, are actions or refraining from certain actions that could expand the number of people that are exposed to the virus. And there are, in fact, also certain things that the government can do to protect certain populations. For example, limiting access to nursing homes and elderly care facilities, for example, that makes sense. But the problem is far beyond these steps that have to do with the virus itself are actions that governments are taking, mostly these liberal municipalities that don't like firearms in the first place, using this virus to engage in gun control.
All right. Well, goodness, let's hope they don't figure out a way to expand this down to the Second Amendment, and let's hope we can take the sage guidance of the president and Anthony Fauci. And thank you for your guidance as always, Mr. Barr.
My pleasure.